So good evening and welcome to this is now the 10th annual Morton Deutsch Award for Distinguished Contributions to Social Justice. I want to begin by just setting some context. Today, women are the breadwinners in 60% of American families, yet women still earn only 77 cents on average for every dollar earned by men, and 88 cents in the White House, and are disproportionately concentrated in lower paying fields and underrepresented in higher paying fields. So on Tuesday, April 8th, President Obama recognized Equal Pay Day, which is the date that symbolizes how far into this year that a woman must work on average to catch up with the average earned by men in the previous year. So on that day, President Obama signed 2 executive orders. One prohibits federal contractors from retaliating against employees for sharing salary information with coworkers to make salaries more transparent, and the other directs the Labor Department to adopt regulations requiring federal contractors to report salary data on things like by sex and race breakdowns. And this affects about 20% of the workforce, which is a good step in the right direction. But then, of course, there is the Paycheck Fairness Act, which yesterday Senate Republicans blocked, which would actually apply those changes of the executive orders to all of the American workforce. So we have quite a bit to do. So it's in this context that I feel re-energized and determined and proud to be recognizing and celebrating 2 very proactive, powerful women, Abby Disney and Madeline Sims, as this year's recipients of the Morton Deutsch Awards for Social Justice. I'm Peter Coleman. I'm the director of the International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution, which organizes and supports this initiative. And I want to start today by introducing the namesake of the award, Morton Deutsch. Professor Deutsch, my colleague and mentor and friend, has for 94 years inspired everyone around him to be their best person and to work hard to make the world a better place for all. He's been busy. He's published in the last couple of years 3 of these books, 3 of these books on this table over here, including this handbook, which just came out this week, which is the 3rd edition of this handbook, the Handbook of Conflict Resolution Theory and Practice, which Morton co-edits with myself and Eric Marcus. So he's been extremely busy. In particular, of late, he's been interested in the problem of trying to get human beings to see themselves as members of one community, to see us not from a nationalistic perspective, ideology, religion, but really to see us as members on this planet. And so he's been working to establish a global community forum. And I think to that end, there are not pledges, what do we call these now? Commitments that we're going to pass around and you can take a look at, and we're looking for people to sign on to this if they are willing to. And I will refer all questions to Mort during the wine and cheese break afterwards. But please join me in thanking Mort Deutsch for all his work. Again, thank you all for coming, but recognize a couple of people that are in the audience. So David and Linda Johnson are here. David is a former student of Morton Deutsch and is in town this weekend to receive a Distinguished Alumni Award from Teachers College. So David, thank you for being here, and thank you for Professor Butler Holmes, who was last year's recipient of the award, is here as well. I don't think there are any other previous recipients that unless I missed somebody. But I also do want to acknowledge that Liberian activist and the Nobel Peace Prize winner Lema Bowie is here as well. So, and thank you to the organizers, particularly Liz Hernandez, who is here somewhere. There she is. So this award was first established in 2005. It came from a sense, really a more sense of the concern around the increasing gap between the haves and have-nots in this world, the sense that we had some sense of why the problem existed, but little sense of how to interrupt it. And so this was an attempt to stimulate and recognize and celebrate people who were doing great scholarship, great practice, or some combination of both, which really led to the interruption of what we would call systems of oppression. And I think both recipients tonight exemplify that. The previous recipients were Michelle Fine, Jeff Canada, Marjorie Benage, John Jost, Janusz Rakowski and Janusz Jelak, both from Warsaw, Sister Elaine Relay, Claude Steele, Erwin Staub, Jean Sharp, and last year Gretchen Buckenholz. And in addition, there's been a very impressive group of the best and brightest graduate student papers at Columbia who've been recipients of our Best Paper Award. So if you look at your agenda, the night is in 3 chunks. First, Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida, who is the director of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program at Columbia, will introduce tonight's recipient of the Best Columbia Student Paper on Social Justice, Madeline Sims. And then Madeline will make a brief presentation on her paper, and then I will say a few words about Abby, the recipient of the Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Award, who will then also make some comments and, I understand, try out some new ideas. And then lastly, we'll open the doors and drink wine and eat cheese in the room. Okay? So thank you all for coming. Beth.
Thank you. So usually, who would be doing this is my colleague Claudia Cohn, who's the Associate Director of the ICCCR. But unfortunately, Claudia couldn't be here. Her surgeon, she had a minor knee surgery, said no, stay where she could. So Claudia very thoughtfully prepared something for me, which I may or may not read some of it, but I should in order to do justice to what she prepared for me. So the student awards are fabulous because it gives us a chance to honor students, graduate students from anywhere around Columbia University who are interested in social justice, research, practice, scholarship, interested in policy, and so on. And I've been on the committee for all 10 years. I couldn't get off the committee even if I chose to. I don't think Claudia would let me. So let me just mention who is on the committee. Claudia Cohn, who's Senior Lecturer in the Social Organizational Psychology Program here at TC, and Associate Director of the MD ICCCR. I forgot that we changed the name. Martha A. Gephardt, who is Research Associate Professor of Education and Co-Director of the J.F. Huber Institute at TC. Helen Lena Verdelli, who's Associate Professor of Psychology and Education at TC. Alexandra Carter, who is a Clinical Professor of Law at the Mediation Clinic and Assistant Professor at Columbia Law School. So we do try to have a variety of people from around the university so we can really be fair and do justice right in our process here. So first I'm going to mention a student who's getting an honorable mention, and that is Sandra Sirota. Is Sandra here? Oh, there you are. So stand up. Stand up. And she wrote an excellent paper on adolescent transformation through human rights education. And she's a doctoral fellow, a first-year doctoral student in international education development, peace, and human rights education. We only have long names. Department of International and Transcultural Studies at Teachers College here. And her paper will be posted on the NDI-CCCR website. So thank you. One more. I'd like to introduce the winning paper, which is Madeline Sims, and she wrote about the business of teaching. Can a new contract change the culture? And her paper will be posted, her intro to her paper will be posted on the NDI-CCCR website. Madeline Sims is a second-year student at Columbia Law School. Madeline developed a strong belief in the power of scholarship to affect real social change while an undergraduate at Dartmouth College, where she majored in comparative literature and minored in public policy. She graduated from Dartmouth Phi Beta Kappa and received the 2012 Jonathan B. Rintos Prize awarded for the best senior thesis in the humanities. So you're collecting a whole string of awards here, right? At Dartmouth, she developed an interest in K-12 education reform and interned at a New York City nonprofit analyzing workforce development initiatives. She currently serves on the board of Columbia's High School Law Institute, which is a year-long program serving students from under-resourced schools throughout New York City that aims to spark an interest in legal studies and contribute to students' college readiness. And this summer, Madeline was working as an associate at the New York-based law firm Davis Polk and Wardwell, and then she'll return to Columbia Law School for her third and final year. The end is in sight, right? So Madeline, would you like to come up here?
Just me.
That's good.
First off, I want to thank the Morton Deutsch International Center for Cooperation and Conflict Resolution for inviting me to join tonight's event. I also want to thank Professor Liebman, who served as an incredibly helpful faculty advisor on the paper that I'll be discussing this evening. In his second State of the Union address, President Barack Obama emphasized that after parents, the most significant impact on a child's success comes from the teacher standing at the front of the classroom. President Obama explained, quote, "In South Korea, teachers are known as nation builders. Here in America, it's time we treated these people with the same level of respect." This is a worthy sentiment, but what does it mean to treat teachers with respect? And how do we ensure that the increased respect translates into the tools, training, and conditions that enable them to provide more effective instruction? Does respect for teachers involve respect for their unions and collaboration with these unions to improve student results? And if so, what should the goals of this management-union partnership be? In attempting to answer these questions, my paper argues that it's necessary to rethink what it is that we as a culture expect teachers to do and how we expect the teacher-school relationship to be structured. The basic document on which unions have long relied to govern relations between teachers and their supervisors is the collective bargaining agreement. Although recent arguments have focused on whether this contract should further cabin or unleash teacher autonomy, the better question is how the contract should define autonomy, such that it affords teachers sufficient independence to contribute to the school's overall educational mission. As cities across the country seek to renegotiate teachers' contracts in a manner that will facilitate rather than impede progress, it's imperative that these revised contracts reflect this more nuanced understanding of teacher autonomy. Although a fragile bipartisan consensus emerged under No Child Left Behind and gained traction under Race to the Top, the implementation of both of these programs ultimately cast considerable doubt on both teachers' unions and the quality of teachers themselves. Over the past decade, unions were cast as the enemy by media and reformers alike. My paper considers how a reinvigorated contract represents an opportunity to empower teachers and reorient the focus of the unions that represent them. My paper also explores how judicial opinions have reinforced the perception of public sector collective bargaining as an anti-democratic practice, one that replaces traditional pathways for determining and implementing policy with secretive closed-door negotiations. It discusses how in an attempt by both parties to use the bargaining agreement to limit the other side's discretion, all involved parties became trapped in what was really an inflexible bureaucracy. While these are all important issues, each of which could be the subject of a day-long conference, tonight I'm going to focus briefly on the importance of forging a meaningful management-labor partnership through the use of both joint goal setting and joint implementation. Although it's true that the interests of unions and students will never be perfectly aligned, this does not mean that collaboration between schools and unions is not a powerful tool with which to improve the teaching profession. Unions are not going to disappear anytime soon. Although early drafts of No Child Left Behind contain language intended to undercut collective bargaining rights, in the end, it became the first federal education law to recognize explicitly the role of collective bargaining in education governance. Engaging unions does not mean blind acceptance. In fact, it means quite the opposite. Engaging unions means continuing to ask questions regarding the connections between union policies and student outcomes until either a satisfactory answer is provided or the collective bargaining agreement is changed. It is only when people are willing to ask these difficult questions of unions and challenge them to critically examine their own practices that education reform can be realized. In my paper, I argue that the new contract should focus on 4 overarching qualities of effective organization. 1, effective pre-job training of new workers. 2, meaningful employee engagement. 3, significant allocation of time for collaboration. And 4, minimization of attrition. Tonight I'll discuss the second item on this list, the idea of employee engagement. You might be wondering what a collective bargaining agreement can really do about that. There are several promising avenues in this regard, one of which is that of teacher evaluations. Evaluation systems imposed unilaterally lead to serious issues regarding teacher morale. But on the other hand, ignoring teacher evaluations entirely eliminates a major source of accountability. Thus, reformers must embrace strategies for implementing such assessments with the active involvement of both unions and their teachers. There are several promising examples of union-district collaboration on both the design and implementation of teacher evaluation systems across the country. The recently finalized collective bargaining agreement in New Haven, Connecticut, which has since been replicated by other cities across the country and highlighted by U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan at a national conference, is one such model. Teachers voted 10-1 to approve the new contract, which aims to both ensure the effectiveness of all teachers and facilitate targeted assistance to those in need of improvement. Although the contract does not gut the steps and lanes model, it does add monetary consequences to the evaluation system by both denying raises based on seniority to all teachers who score on the bottom 2 levels of the 5-point scale and providing increased assistance to teachers at all levels. The new contract also incorporates peer assessments into the evaluation system, allowing teachers to continue to play an active role throughout the process. An innovative aspect of one of the factors of the evaluation system, the student achievement factor, is that along with analyzing performance on standardized tests, it also considers whether or not students reach goals that are jointly decided upon by teachers and principals at the onset of the year. Real consequences accompany both high and low scores. Teachers given a 1 who do not improve by the end of the year may face termination, while those who receive a 5 have the chance for advancement. New Haven's Labor Management Partnership helped create a flexible system that is more responsive to localized conditions and that creates a designated forum through which teachers can reflect upon their own successes and failures. Unlike evaluation programs in other cities, for instance, New Haven's system allows teachers to revise their goals in cooperation with supervisors at a mandatory mid-year conference. This example illustrates that it is in fact possible to alter the sense of antagonism between labor and management within a city's schools. An English teacher applauded this type of collaboration that enabled the new evaluation system in a recent article. Quote, "We're in a post-industrial version of this profession. This us versus them mentality has to give away." Ultimately, a comprehensive performance evaluation and development system must both differentiate teachers based on their effectiveness and use the evaluations to provide targeted professional development. When unions are included in both the design and implementation of such a system, it is possible to avoid the morale issues inherent in unilaterally imposed reforms, while creating a powerful accountability tool to help ensure that all students are truly taught by qualified educators. To conclude, U.S. schools must make a choice. They must choose whether to continue experimenting with various reforms under the current contract, a contract that expects obedience rather than initiative from America's teachers. Or they must reinvent the collective bargaining agreement in a way that reimagines teachers' role within the education system. A profound shift in the teaching profession is needed, and accomplishing this shift will require buy-in from various groups, including administrators, teachers, and communities themselves. Procuring the support will not happen overnight, but the alternative, continuing to view teachers as interchangeable parts and unions as nothing more than an enemy to be defeated, will continue to obstruct even the best planned reform efforts for years to come. Thank you so much.
So we have time for 1 or 2 questions or comments people have. Now's your chance. We'll teach you others later too. I'm going to list the award. This is the award.
They're very heavy.
It's like lethal weapons. A lovely globe, and then it's inscription.
Okay, so I would like to introduce the recipients of the Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Award, Abby Disney. And I want to begin by borrowing the words of Gretchen Buchenholz, last year's recipient, who said, I first got to know Abby in a little house on East 91st Street. In that house, there were 3 tiny bedrooms. Each had 2 cribs, a changing table, oxygen tanks, and a rocking chair. The babies who would be living there were coming back to the community, to their families or adoptive homes, border babies of the late 80s and early 90s who had languished for months and sometimes years in hospital wards, often tied to the sides of cribs with gauze in cages, while the systems that should have protected and nurtured them were frozen with inaction. The Association Benefit Children's 2 lawsuits ended the widespread practice of warehousing babies like these. And it was Abby who prepared that little house for their arrival, and she courageously jumped in with barrier-shattering fervor. She was convinced that the circumstances of their birth should not determine their lives, innocently seeking to defy even death. The smallest, most seemingly insignificant detail got her full attention. She sorted through piles of mismatched socks, dolls with one eye, missing arms, torn blankets, and soiled onesies, figuring out what should stay and what should go. She washed and folded laundry and established a system that organized a small army of professionals and volunteers to work 24/7. This house was just one of the stops on Abby's quest to reconcile the awesome responsibility of the gifts of her birth with her intense longing for social justice. The scholar in her sorted through these dichotomies to see what should be kept, what should be discarded, and what should be laundered as her public direction took shape. Abby discovered that comfort is both rare and commonplace, as complex and as simple as the wrinkles of fat on the back of a baby's neck. The force of Abby's conviction has created powerful ripples of change across the globe, and she never takes center stage, except for tonight. She is humble and she is grateful and prefers to stand outside the spotlight, but to me, she is the light. End of quote. Thank you, Gretchen. Having known Abby for 25 years now as a friend and a colleague, this fact has become abundantly clear to me. She is the brightest of lights. Let me tell a couple of stories that give you some small sense of Abby, the person, the philanthropist, and the activist. In the 1970s, when Abby was in high school at the Buckley School in Los Angeles with Leah Doyle and Deborah Howes, who's here somewhere, she joined the boys' soccer team at her school because they didn't have a girls' team. And she was quite a gifted athlete, excelled on the team, outperforming many of the boys. And for this, she was berated by both her family and by the principal of the school for bringing shame to the institution. I want to now publicly thank that principal for pissing Abby off and perhaps triggering the hurricane force determination that has come to bring her to the work on the cause of social justice. And we've seen this in many ways. We've seen it in her approach to philanthropy. So Abby has written and critiqued traditional models of charity and philanthropy, seeing them as sort of embedded in the system where the issues that receive the most attention are determined by the privileged and determined by the forces of the market. In other words, philanthropy can run the risk of becoming another manifestation of structural oppression. She has lamented charitable giving as too often based on what she's called the hierarchy of innocence, suggesting that popular expressions of charity, of giving money, tend to embrace with the greatest warmth those who are thought to be least to blame for their problems, and whose problems invoke in one as little as possible a sense of shame or injustice. And so charity in the mainstream defines an abandoned baby as inherently more valuable than a woman in prison. A baby with AIDS is better than an adult with AIDS, but a baby with cancer is better than a baby with AIDS. In contrast, Abby has advocated for and really modeled and implemented a form of philanthropy with her family, her partner Pierre, and her colleagues that is really focused with a rational eye towards dismantling the systems of inequity. She recognizes that there is often no real power-sharing arrangement in philanthropy, where the dynamic between the grant maker and the grantee rarely amounts to anything other than a purely paternalistic one, no matter what the language about partnership and cooperation. So for 2 decades, the driver of Abby's work in the different organizations that she has founded and led have been rooted in the following 4 convictions. 1, the powerless and the marginalized have amazing capacities to affect change in the very places we think they're defenseless. 2, the most inventive and humane solutions to social problems often come from the people most affected by those problems. 3, by communicating this idea, we can humanize situations and reach people at the level of their deepest feelings, advancing advocacy and opening up a space for real change to occur. And 4, this requires combining resources and funding with a genuine sharing of power. Abby and her colleagues have done this through a web of organizations that support systemic change at every level. The Daphne Foundation, founded with Pierre in 1991, Pierre Hauser, who is her spouse, who's here. And their intention was to support good citizenship here in New York City. It's today a progressive social change foundation that has made millions of dollars of grants to grassroots community-based organizations working on, with low-income communities in New York City in areas ranging from women's rights to AIDS advocacy, children's health, labor conditions, incarceration, community organizing, and environmentalism. And then in 2006, Abby began to act as a catalyst for women, justice, and peace globally. Having met Lema Bowie and been inspired by the work of Lema and the women in Liberia, she became instantly compelled to tell that then relatively unknown story of how a small band of women, mothers, aunts, and grandmothers, dared to challenge the barriers of gender and politics in Africa and bring an end to a protracted civil war through persistent, tenacious, but peaceful tactics. It was at this point that Abby turned to the family business of filmmaking to tell Lema's story, and the result of that collaboration with Lema, with Ginny Redeker, the director of the film, and many others, was the film Pray the Devil Back to Hell, which is an extraordinarily hopeful documentary about the role that the women's movement played in ending the civil war in Liberia. The film was met with high praise, critical acclaim, including winning Best Documentary Film at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York. Ginny wrote a bit about Abby's role in that. She said, it's Abby's incredible commitment to constantly questioning herself and the world around her and asking herself what she can do to make it better that makes her extraordinary. She is relentless in her challenging of herself. It is this challenging of herself that led her out of the comfort zone to Liberia in the first place. And it's phenomenal that on her first visit, when she heard a couple of women casually mention something about this or that day that they had sat under the blazing hot sun on a soccer field demanding that Charles Taylor go to the peace table, that Abby recognized that they had done something extraordinary and that the world needed to know about it. She then did everything in her power to make sure that that happened, from carrying the tripod for the cinematographer under that same blazing hot sun, paying for the film, to making sure it was seen around the world. With the launch of then Fork Films with Ginny, they began to invest in and create media that makes an important social contribution, particular emphasis on material that has been overlooked, people who tend to be underestimated, and stories that have been left out of the mainstream historical record. Following this, she and her partners launched something called Peace is Loud. It's an organization that supports female voices in international peace building through nonviolent means. It really is an attempt to provide an opportunity for the narratives of peace and peacemakers, particularly bottom-up peacemakers, to be shared publicly and shared widely. One example of this was the 2009 Global Peace Tour that Abby organized, a 9-month grassroots screening tour of Pray the Devil Back to Hell to hundreds of communities around the world, in churches and living rooms and community spaces and forums in the US and abroad. The tour culminated in a showcase in New York City at the UN's International Day of Peace. And as a result of that movement, Abby's team were contracted to develop the celebrated television project Women, War, and Peace, which was shown here on PBS. In her spare time, Abby has played a critical role in a number of social and political organizations. She chaired the New York Women's Foundation, helped lead the White House Project, the Global Fund for Women, the Roy Disney Family Foundation, and the Fund for the City of New York, as well as been on advisory boards of a broad range of organizations working in the areas of poverty, women's issues, education, and the environment. She also formed Liberty Media with Gloria Steinem and a group of other passionate investors to rescue and secure the fate of Ms. Magazine. She got her master's and then her PhD in English here in the meantime, and somehow was able to raise an extraordinary family. I think Henry's here. Henry, her son Henry is here. Henry, Eamon, Olivia, and Charlotte, who I suspect one day one of you will be up here introducing to honor their creative and groundbreaking work that they too have gone on to make the world a more peaceful place. One other thing I just want to say on a personal note, that in the midst of all of these world-class, extraordinary achievements that Abby has been able to mobilize in her short time in this world, she, the person, somehow remains one of the smartest, most genuine, honest, generous, and passionate, and really fun people that I know. She has a remarkably candid sense of humor about herself, which is extraordinary, and has an ability to navigate through the different worlds of business and academics and filmmaking and peacemaking and development and friendship, and really on the ground, hands in the dirt service that really continues to amaze me. So please join me in welcoming this year's recipient of the Morton Deutsch Award.
Incredibly nice. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you. But do you want to tell the people in Malaysia you have their black box? Because I've been thinking that the whole time. It's kind of distracting. I'm going to do something heretical and say, is there any way anybody could just get in line while I talk? So otherwise, I'm just going to feel really guilty about how long I go on. But I've decided to exploit all of you. You could open that door, why not, right?
We can liquor them up.
Yeah, because I might be talking for a while. So here's the deal.
You're planning like a couple of hours?
Yeah.
You got the room until 10:30.
I should 11. So first of all, in all seriousness, I just want to say thank you to Mark Deutsch and to the center, and to my home away from home, Columbia, where I spent 10 years getting a PhD. And where I was married on this campus. This means so much to me, you can't even begin to imagine. Really, I'm so honored. And I know that's sort of in the first line of every. So where I put my glasses? I just did that thing.
So there are the red ones? Okay.
Yes. I can't believe I did that. I just realized I can't see any of this. I know that's in the rule book about things you say at the beginning of the speech, but this is honest to God the truth. I'm flabbergasted, honored, gobsmacked, and all the rest of it. And to be in the company of Gretchen Buchenholz, who has been a sister, godmother, hero, teacher, mentor, angel, friend, capable of getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning and coming over to my house and watching my kids while emergencies were happening around us and so forth for a quarter century, Gretchen. For that, I'm incredibly grateful to just be your words about me, but also just to be on the same level with you. It means so much to me, you can't imagine. And again, to be honored by someone like Mort, the mensch of the century, I think of him, but also really a pioneer in conflict resolution and peace building and distributive justice. That means so much to me. I also just want to say that I'm enormously happy that this was Peter Coleman who called me to break the news, because he's really been my main connection into thinking about peace building and conflict resolution. I was a bit of an idiot savant about it. And I think mainly just because I wanted everybody to stop shouting at each other. That's probably where it always comes from anyway. But it wasn't until I was really introduced to the ideas of unpacking privilege and thinking about conflict resolution, mostly by Peter, through a long series of conversations about the holes I was finding myself, digging for myself in various ways over the years. So I just want to thank you for all of your friendship and all of your mentorship over these years. I also have my sister from another mister here named Lemma Bowie. I know you all know that she's a wonderful person. It's almost silly to say so. But she's an incredible friend to me and has been the same kind of friend, a pretty AM friend. And I'm just really grateful to her for being here. I have also, when Peter points out Deb and Leah and John, these are 3 of my oldest friends. And I'm talking about 4th grade, 7th grade, freshman year of college. That's pretty great. And thank you guys for continuing to show up. You're not sick of me yet. So when Peter called me and told me that that I'd been chosen for this, yes, gobsmacked. Honest to God, I'm not kidding. And then he said the most paralyzing words in the English language, which were, do anything you want. Be creative. So the evening's been approaching, you know, on spider-like toes with some ominousness to me. And my dread has been growing every day. But what I decided to do was write something down and then read it to you.
We're bringing liquor.
Bravo! I do all my best work on this. Oh, and now that I have said this, I realize I've just left two very important people out of this. I just want to acknowledge my husband while the wine is getting handed out, and just say thank you to Pierre, who just, if there were a gold medal for best human on earth, he would get it, because he is just not only patient enough to stay around me, but he's been an inspiration to me and a gift. You know, he saves my life every day. And I want to say thank you for Henry for showing up. But not only that, you know, I don't know how a kid comes out better and more well-adjusted than their parents. I think we're pretty good parents, but he's better than anything we ever did, so I suspect there's something inherent in him that's pretty awesome. So, you're a wonderful boy. Thank God every day. So I decided to do this dreaded thing that I normally hate because it's deadly boring, which is to write something down, look at how fat it is. But I swear it's triple spaced, it won't be so bad. But you know, when you have an opportunity like this, it's good to kind of use it as an opportunity to push yourself forward. So I apologize, and I know you're not supposed to apologize when you give a speech. But with me, it's sort of like a sneeze, and the longer I hold it back, the more embarrassing it will eventually be for everyone. So I apologize. That I'm going to speak too long and I'm going to read. But my plan is this. I'm treating you like an editorial board. This is a book proposal. And I more than anything I've ever done, the one thing I think of myself as, I don't really do, which is write. I think of myself primarily as a writer. And I just never get a chance to sit still long enough to write down the book that's been gestating in my heart for years and years and years. So I decided to treat you and the threat of humiliation that you represent to me as the impetus I needed to get some thoughts down on paper. So I need you, first of all, to tell me if this is actually a book, or it's all in my mind. And I need you to tell me if you can think of any wit or science or wisdom that I don't know about and haven't used in here that can move me along a little bit in my thinking. And I need you to tell me where I'm completely missing it, or off base, or saying the wrong thing. Who's not wrong-headed once in a while? So put on your thinking caps and take out a pen, because I really do hope for some input from you when I get through to the end of this. And please don't hesitate to tell me if I'm wrong. Just don't want to go out and embarrass myself. Maybe I'll put you all in the acknowledgments, so if it's bad. It's maybe a sign of my shallowness that I've given a lot of thought to the title of this book. I go through titles like I've got a Mickey on my back. An edifice wrecked, it's one of my personal favorites. But I've settled on my nervous breakthrough. So one quiet morning in January this year, I woke up, and in spite of the oft-repeated warnings of people far smarter and well-adjusted than myself, I checked my phone. My email was quiet, my Facebook was quiet, but Twitter was erupting in the sort of four-letter words that usually are referred to as working blue. Twitter is an unmediated conduit to people who don't already agree with you, or a cesspool, depending on your point of view. But things are coming in like, you should be ashamed of yourself, go fuck yourself, and you're a cunt and you should die. Now, sadly, this kind of talk is rather routine out there in internet worlds, but I'm a babe in these particular woods, so it shocked me and frankly hurt to discover that there were people out there who I'd never heard of, who were hating my guts, especially given that I had had no idea what my transgression had been. And so, like the 21st century girl that I am, I Googled myself, and that's when I discovered that the Hollywood Reporter had lifted 2 entire Facebook posts from my private Facebook page with neither my prior knowledge or permission, and had turned them into a story with the headline, Walt Disney's grandniece agrees with Meryl Streep he was a racist. Well, it was my own fault. This is true. I had mouthed off on Facebook in support of some remarks that Meryl Streep had made during an awards ceremony about my uncle and about the film Saving Mrs. Banks. And I had been sort of lulled into thinking that you could have a podium for $5,000 and still have your privacy, which was probably a little diluted on my part. But what I didn't anticipate, and what continues to astonish me now, is that anyone cared what I thought. I still don't really understand that. And while I would say everything again in a heartbeat, I would really never have said it a mere 2 months after my cousin had died, the last of Walt's kids, and someone who had spent her entire life fighting precisely those kinds of charges. And I had said it all in print for everyone in the world to see. So here are the 2 posts, and I kind of abbreviate them a little bit. So the first post said, if someone's going to have mixed feelings about a cultural icon, wouldn't it be a member of their family more than anyone else? And if you're going to have mixed feelings about a family member, and we all do, take it from me, you really need to be as honest as possible about those feelings, or else you're going to lead yourself into many a blind alley in life. Anti-Semite? Check. Misogynist? Of course. Racist? Come on, he made a film, The Jungle Book, about how you should stay with your own kind at the height of the fight over segregation. I mean, come on. How much more information do you need? But damn, he was a hella good at making films, and his work has made billions of people happy. There's no denying it. So there you go, mixed feelings up the wazoo. And then, just because there weren't enough nails in my coffin, the next day I added something because, weirdly, people thought I was criticizing Meryl Streep. I said, I have to clarify, I loved what she said. I know he was a man of his times, and I forgive him that, but saving Mrs. Banks was a brazen attempt by the company to make a saint out of the man. A devil he was not, nor an angel, that's the point. In spite of it all, his vision was amazing, and he brought joy to so many around the world. I don't believe in bashing for bashing's sake, but whenever I see a misplaced attempt at hagiography, I think we need to speak our minds. And I didn't intend to just take a random swipe at the reputation of a long-dead family member, but what enraged me was the way that the company seemed, in an effort to squeeze that one more golden egg out of a very tired and menopausal goose, was foisting fiction on us in order to sell us a new idea of Walt as this saintly, Santa Claus-y kind of guy, and it just pissed me off. And my family was pretty mad. Now, you need to understand that in a family like mine, there's always a backstory. I know every family has backstory, but the backstories of the rich and famous tend to be a tad more lurid and soapy than those of mere mortals, not because they're inherently more interesting, but because money and a famous last name tend to raise the temperature of everything and everyone they come into contact with. And the backstory here is that years before all of this, my dad had fought Diane's husband for control of the company. And in the course of that fight, things had been said in the press that couldn't be taken back, namely one particular thing about my father being the idiot nephew, which my father was a tad sensitive about, can't imagine why. And while the 2 sides of the family had been close in my childhood, the relationships abruptly ended, and we had all become strangers to each other, my cousins and I. And not just any kind of strangers, but the kind of strangers who circle each other on a dark subway platform, wondering where the knife is and who's going to pull it first. So the whole episode really got under my skin. I mean, it was regretful, and I was genuinely angry at myself for having caused pain to my family, but in equal measure, I still stand by what I said. But it was too far under my skin to be explained by just that. There was something about the way this small little thing had amounted to taking a baseball bat to the seething beehive of resentment that was my family that really needed to be looked at. And I'm coming to believe that it has lived with me longer than it normally would have, because within it are the secrets to what holds a family like mine together in all of its dysfunction and resentments. So why does what happened in a family like mine matter to anyone else? Well, here's the thing. I'm a privileged woman, born to a privileged family in a privileged country. And it's sort of like I was bitten by the class version of the radioactive spider. I think I've developed some superpowers. I think it's possible that as a result of the weird and unusual circumstances under which I was brought up, I've developed a special bullshit detector. Spider-Man might have his Spidey vision, and Wonder Woman might have her robe of truth, which I would give my left arm for, by the way. But when a load of crap is being thrown at me to shut me up and keep me in my place, I seem to be able to see that it's more than a mere load of crap that's being thrown. So here's the thing. I am to America what America is to the world. I have lived a distilled version of all the inequity, the oblivious entitlement, the willing ignorance of injustice, and complicity in all the violence, both metaphorical and literal, that is required to hold all these systems in place. And so the superpower is an important one that could potentially pull all of our American heads out of our American asses just long enough to be a force for good in this world, and that's what I'm after. So the family's objections to my words divided into two basic categories. One was the objection that I basically called somebody that they loved, a family member, a bad person, and they were hurt by that. And the other had to do with my disloyalty of heart and mind, and underneath it all lay a third unspoken value, so much a value and a given that it remained tacit, but it was always shooting through, and that was the thing that you don't question your privilege. You don't ask questions. And that not asking questions about privilege constitutes a kind of entitlement that is sort of like the third spike on the pitchfork that hurls a girl like me in her place. My cousins were understandably very hurt by the public nature of my comments. I had put myself in an impossible situation. I felt truly awful about the timing of the comments and about the pain that I'd caused them. And I could apologize for those things, but was I required to apologize for what I still believed to be truthful comments? My family wanted badly for me to know that I was just plain wrong, that I didn't understand, that I misapprehended the whole thing. He didn't, in the time-honored phrasing of racists everywhere, have a racist bone in his body. No one, famous or not, likes to hear someone say that their grandfather was not a nice man, but of course that's not what I said, and the difference is informative. What's more, there is nothing my cousin said with which I disagreed. He was a nice man, charming, funny, true to the people he loved, bent on making good films for families to watch together, and goodness knows, talented beyond measure. The sticky wicket here is that I still believe that nothing I said contradicts what my cousins believe. And the fact that I need to explain why I think so is what I think needs to be spelled with scrupulous care here, because it's important. Walt had a private side, and in his private life he was a lovely man, and he had a public side. And on that side, the effect of his work was to have active and hurtful impact on the real lived experience of many people. And whether or not he meant for those things to happen, it's foolish to pretend that by behaving nicely in the finite circle of people that constituted his friends and family, he could negate the effect of his work over years of a career of a public life that had militated always toward solidifying the power of the powerful and undermining the credibility, self-esteem, and well-being of the powerless. So let's talk about what it means to be nice. A couple years ago, we did back-to-back screenings of Pray the Devil Back to Hell in Ramallah, and then the next night in Jerusalem. And the Ramallah screening went exactly the way the screenings always went in conflict of. There were questions about peace and peace building, and ideas about how to emulate the women of Liberia, and comparisons of the two situations. It was a pretty run-of-the-mill screening for me. And then the next night in Jerusalem was a totally different screening. There were lots of questions about how Liberia was doing, how the child soldiers were, what was going on with the economy and so forth. There were the filmmaking questions, where'd you get the footage, why'd you make the film, all of that. They were all reasonable questions, but what was different was what didn't come up. There was sympathy, but from a distance. The women were seen as heroes and inspirational, and people talked about the things they wanted to do in their own lives to help others. But still, somehow it was though they were looking down from a distance onto a situation that was nothing more than metaphorically related to their own lives and experiences. I'm in Jerusalem, remember. There was an anthropological quality to the discussion. There were these questions like they were tourists in the misery of others. And I realized that night this was exactly identical to the reactions of audiences in the United States and parts of Western Europe. Why? Well, there's one quality that Israelis and Americans share, and that is that things are being done by their governments in their names, often with the enthusiastic support from the public, that might or might not, depending on your persuasion, be described as war crimes. Torture, extrajudicial assassinations, the constant flouting of public opinion globally, and the willingness, tolerance of enormous civilian death tolls for the sake of dubious political aims. Okay, so now I've gone and done it. My son will tell you, they call me Debbie Downer for a reason. I have left dinner parties in tatters as a result of my tendency to go there at the smallest of provocations. And I try not to sound like a total party pooper every time I open my mouth, but in all seriousness, It's precisely this fear of the penalty, the fear of being seen as a downer, a shrew, a heartbeat, a harridan, that annoying person who always reminds you of the stuff you're having too much fun to think about, that prevents the massive majority of us from having the kind of conversations we really ought to be having more often. And this is not to say that I think Americans or Israelis are uniquely bad or oblivious or insensitive. I think that given the way all people need to protect their hearts from all the awful, unpleasant facts out there, almost any person born and raised in similar circumstances would greet this set of issues in a similar way. There's really only so much each of us feels we can do to fix things, and there's only so much misery any of us can tolerate knowing about. In fact, there's only so much of anything any of us can tolerate knowing, period. As my personal hero Marion Evans, better known as George Eliot, said in Middlemarch, quote, "If we had a keen vision and feeling of all ordinary human life, it would be like hearing the grass grow and the squirrel's heartbeat, and we should die of that roar that which lies on the other side of silence. As it is, the quickest of us walk about, well watered with stupidity." She has, of course, written this in her typically oblique 19th century prose, so let me paraphrase by way of Jack Nicholson. You can't handle the truth. We especially can't handle all the stuff that is tragic, and so we find ways to defend ourselves against the pain of knowing, of thinking. We wad and cushion ourselves with stupidities like tradition and culture and entertainment and all of the shared hallucinations that constitute what we call common knowledge. The wadding is learned. That is why in the wonderful story of The Emperor's New Clothes, it is a child who points out that the emperor is naked. It's not that the others around the emperor are bad or stupid, it's just that they either didn't allow themselves to see the problem or because they were too afraid to say that they did. Back in 2011, there was a very pleasant film called The Help, about a Southern girl who writes a book calling out her racist Southern town on all its hypocrisy and cruelty. Very sweet film, but a bit simplistic, and I kind of left feeling an uneasy feeling and not really able to explain why. And later that year, I picked up an op-ed piece in the Times by Patricia Turner that named the problem that I was wrestling with. You see, The Help handles racism with the same Hollywood tropes it has always handled it with. The racist white characters are all the same. They're all bad in the same way and in every way. Not just in terms of how they treat the black people. They cheat, they lie, they hate their children, and act in every way like people we'd never be friends with. They're easy to call out, and in the self-satisfied way of so many films about Jim Crow, it is easy to imagine ourselves stepping into the heroic role of the protagonist, bravely fighting back on behalf of victimized black people. And that's comforting, isn't it? To know that if you were born then, you'd have behaved better than your grandparents. Of course, not only does this kind of portrayal deprive the black characters of all nuance and agency in the equation, but it offers the white viewers a very comforting idea of who they have been in the same situation. No reasonable person could possibly go along with Jim Crow under those circumstances. But of course, history tells a very different story. In fact, very few white people did not go along with Jim Crow. Most Southern whites enthusiastically supported and even enforced it, and many Northern whites saw it was a pretty understandable way to handle the racial differences that made for plenty of tension where they were living. The majority of the whites who supported and marched along with Martin Luther King, and even some who rode buses and lost their lives registering voters, came from outside the South, and therefore outside of the system of social punishments and fear of ostracism. And if you have ever seen some of those photographs of 6-year-old Ruby Bridges' first day of school, you'll see a very lot of ordinary-looking, perfectly nice PTA mothers being held back by the police, their faces contorted with hate. The detestable racist, like the detestable extremist, the detestable anti-Semite, and the detestable Afrikaner, are the stock and trade of Hollywood's formula for telling these stories. But all of these depictions paper over the ugly fact that plenty of people that you and I might otherwise consider nice and decent and normal had to be complicit in the creation and enforcement of such reprehensible systems in order for them not only to exist, but to thrive for extended period of times. I know this well and from personal experience. My mother and her family were from New Orleans. My grandmother deeply wanted me to understand the values and traditions she had come from, many aspects of which were, in fact, wonderful and the stuff of great family pride. She taught me to cook the way her mother had taught her to cook, and I'm enormously grateful for that to this day. And when my grandfather was only 59 years old and had the first of a long series of debilitating strokes, my grandmother heroically set aside everything she otherwise enjoyed doing to take care of him. She did so at great cost to her own emotional and physical well-being for the next 15 difficult and lonely years. I certainly hope that if I'm ever faced with that kind of demand on my life, I'll greet it with even half of the grace and loving kindness that she brought to my grandfather's last years. My grandmother was also a racist. There is no sugarcoating it. She was a deeply racist woman who disliked anyone of any different race, and black people especially. She said awful things that I still have in my head that I wish I could somehow purge, things that are tinged with hatred so badly that even as a child I couldn't help but catch my breath when I heard them. And because as a child I was too young to understand what was happening, I of course never challenged her on these things. And while that's totally understandable, I still carry around the weight of a feeling of complicity, of having accommodated her hatred by my silence, even by loving her. Nice people made Jim Crow, and nice people kept it going. They also perpetrated the Holocaust and the apartheid and the Turkish slaughter of the Armenians and the rape of Nanjing. And by commission or omission, they do horrible things every day. It's a phenomenon Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, but I wonder if it's more a question of the evil of banality. The Boston bombing showed us this problem as the first images of the bombers started to trickle out to a befuddled media. On every station on the dial, you could hear mystified reporters interviewing mystified friends and families of the two men. Joe Har was a nice guy. He had friends. He had a Facebook account. He smoked pot. He partied. It was inconceivable that someone so ordinary could be capable of an act of such calculated cruelty. He was nice. Too nice to have done something like this. And if these guys could hide such deep wells of ugliness under those benign veneers, then who would not be capable of such a thing? So maybe it's time to unpack the meaning of nice. Nice is not good. Johar Tsarnaev was inoffensive. He didn't trouble the water. He didn't cause any problems or make trouble. He was average. Nice is a start, but it's a long way from being a high enough bar if we're going to make a civilized society. Good is something else again. It's not the absence of evil, but the presence of kindness. It's the active search for justice and care for the well-being of others. It's not so much a question of the bad things you haven't done as of the generosity, kindness, and courage you have. And there are times in all of our lives when the need to be nice can interrupt and undermine the willingness to be good. Everyone in that theater in Jerusalem, like everyone at every screening I've been to in the US and across parts of Europe, with some exceptions, I'm sure, were nice. They wanted to be good people, they wanted to help, and they wanted to know how, and they just sat through a film specifically about why war is a stupid, stupid choice made by people who do not care about the cost of their political ambitions to the innocents who suffer, and precious few of them were either willing or able to acknowledge that the film had just confronted them with some powerful parallels with their own lives that needed to be noted and examined. But let me be very clear, I'm not lecturing from a high pulpit of moral authority. I guarantee you I have no idea what I'm going to eat tomorrow, much less what I'm going to do to use my life to its best and highest purpose for the next few decades. And I'm certain that I don't do enough. My carbon footprint is too big. I eat too much meat. I love foie gras, I'm sorry. I don't give enough money away, and I'm sure I could do it better. And I certainly haven't done enough to challenge the military-industrial complex that is the driving force behind so much war in the world, nor the entertainment-industrial complex that romanticizes and markets all that war to us. I'm not claiming that the retreat into niceness and the wadding of the self, the militant unknowing that we all occasionally do, is not totally understandable or a quality unique to Americans or Israelis because we are worse than anyone else. The retreat into niceness is a normal and totally reasonable response to the demands of a moral universe laden with 1,000 challenges to our deepest beliefs. If Ghanaians or Vietnamese or Indians were transported to our socialist circumstances, they'd be just as capable of looking the other way when the act of knowing presented an existential threat to the comforts of an unexamined life. The human condition, turning away from life's darker corners and pretending they don't matter or are easily overcome. I think that's a fair judgment. But if all you ever wear is rose-colored glasses, how will you ever see a red flag? The most common objection to my remarks is that it's unfair to hold him to the standards of our day and age. Everyone was a racist then, right? And everyone's so much nicer now, problem solved. But when you say everyone, whom do you mean exactly? I'm pretty sure that most African Americans at the time didn't see anything normal or nice about the King of the Jungle number in Jungle Book. Does a young girl take away from Snow White or Cinderella an image of her life that will help her grow into a fully realized woman? Does an African American watch the Crows, one of whom is named Jim Crow, look down on Dumbo from the telephone wire above and believe that their race is respected by their countrymen or thought of as having anything more than shucking and jiving to offer? Does a Jewish person look at those early drawings of the Big Bad Wolf or the Three Little Pigs and see anything but a hostile and ugly image of a Jewish peddler bent on tricking his customers and squeezing every penny out of every last transaction? I believe Uncle Walt was nice. I also believe he was prejudiced in the passive, everyday way that most people are. I believe he was no worse or better than you and I. Bigotry is not simply a litmus test that comes up negative, positive. We all inhabit a spectrum of ignorance and suspicion about the other, no matter our color or history. And the spectrum runs from the benign and passive and persuadable to the poisonous and aggressive and adamant. If you need someone to sound like the Grand Wizard before you're willing to call him a racist, you're simply not being realistic about how racism works, particularly in the encrypted ways in which it tends to manifest in the modern age. And if this is the way you're determined to operate, you make it possible for a guy like Paul Ryan to get away with a line like, "I don't have a racist bone in my body," having just impugned the honor and work ethic of every black man in every urban area. If you don't just come right out and say it, or if you do just come out and say it but smile when you do, if you never actually hit anyone, if you dress nicely and help the old lady across the street somehow, if you follow a certain set of rather superficial rules, you can do pretty much anything and still claim not to have a racist bone in your body. We have slipped into a way of talking about prejudice that is simplistic and counterproductive. But history tells us that to be nice and normal is not the same as to be good. Nice people made Jim Crow work and apartheid and the Holocaust. The trick is not to lean back into the certainty of hindsight and wag a pompous finger. The trick is to have a good hard look around ourselves and to ask ourselves in what ways we are slouching into something normal that will reveal itself someday to have been cruel, ungenerous, and indecent in years to come. Walt made beautiful films. He was a gifted, brilliant, and yes, very nice man, and it would be impossible to measure the joy he's brought into the world. And he did not always see black people as equals. And he did not support the idea that women should live in equal dignity with men. A pedestal, after all, can as easily be turned into a bludgeon. My assertion that Uncle Walt was a man of contradictions and not always a perfect soul caused a great deal of anger and hurt feelings among my family and even among people I've never met or who never knew the man. But all I'm really saying is that he's like me and you and everyone we know. Our world is in some trouble at the moment, and the need is not for hypnotists that lull us into comfort by weaving us comfortable tales of our own goodness. What we need is a healthy dose of honesty and all the courage that that demands. And that brings us to the question of loyalty. What do we owe the people who've been nice to us? To whom do we owe our loyalty? And when does the value of loyalty to family and loved ones give way to the value of loyalty to humankind? Especially to those people who haven't been as lucky as you and I, as gifted with treasure and trust as we are. How have we been persuaded to value loyalty for its own sake, rather than ask loyalty to what? Maybe what I'm saying about Uncle Walt is a no-brainer for some of you. Maybe you're red diaper babies out there, or you're just so comfortable being lefties in Manhattan that you wonder why this is a controversy at all. Of course you say, of course he was a racist. Why are we even talking about this? But the fact that it's so easy for you is probably more attributable to the position you were born in than to your own moral courage. I have lived what it's like to cross a political Rubicon, and it's not an easy thing. The penalties are mostly emotional, but they're high. I would imagine that when the Sossi files were opened in East Germany and the evidence that Alger Hiss was a spy for the Soviets left a fair number of left-wing families in a deep, deep mess. Loyalty is a hard thing to shake, and to add to that the deep human urge to never admit when one has been wrong, and you get a whiff of the kind of fear, timidity, and aversion to risk that makes for a calcified and broken political dynamic. It's the kind of calcified dynamic we suffer from today in this country. Many men and women have bucked the common wisdom of their time to stand up and declare that something was not right. It took a great deal of moral courage for them to do so, and the social and emotional costs of their behavior were high. Even so, there have always been people like Harriet Beecher Stowe and Eleanor Roosevelt and Oskar Schindler and Karl Bonhoeffer, and thank God for them, traitors all. It's an extraordinarily difficult thing to be a black sheep in your family and a traitor to your class. I have come to believe that not only are these traitors some of the best and bravest people on earth, but perhaps history would be well served if we would only encourage more such treason and reward rather than punish it when it happens. That is that.
Abby's willing to take a couple of questions. People can get wine and come back if they like.
Yeah.
But are there any questions that anyone wants to raise at this point?
Input, thoughts, books I should be reading, science, I know about. Madam Vote.
You're such a controversial figure. And that book, if you ever write, I
When?
can just say, when you write, you'll be on every major news outlet. And Pierre, you will have to do the emotional counseling at night. That's what costs.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay.
Mark, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think your talk was powerful, beautiful, and very personal. I would translate into different terms. How do you deal with difficult conflicts? How do you deal with somebody who does not want to cooperate, does not want to negotiate, does not want to change? And I have, in that book, I have a new section in my chapter which deals with difficult conflicts. I think you have to be very firm in standing for what you stand for. You have to be friendly towards the other, caring for the other. You have to be flexible in the sense that you don't necessarily adhere to the words of your position, even though you adhere to your position. You recognize the 4 F's.
How do you be flexible with inflexible people?
You try to understand them. You try to find, in the book also. In the introductory chapter, I talk about a husband and wife. She was a feminist, and he believed in the old-fashioned traditional marriage. So a husband works outside the home, and the wife does all the duties within the household. And they had to deal with that conflict. And it was a bit of conflict. But first they had to listen to the other, to understand how the other came to be what they were, and have a point of view that they had. And then, once they listened to one another, they were able to accept each other as human beings, enable them to talk more constructively about their problems.
We're gonna bring you in to my family. We'll see if they shred you like they've shredded everybody else. You had a question, yeah? Did you?
Yeah, I was wondering why a book is the format that you've chosen.
Is there a better one?
Well, it's just open, I guess.
Well, it doesn't really lend itself to film well, you know, that's a pretty boring film, I have to say. It would be like Coin Wisconsin. And I'm not as gifted as Philip Glass. A book because I really am a better writer than I am those other forms of expression, so it's most fascinating place.
Thank you for your presentation. I think that if you're going to write this, start with how you discovered racism. There's different levels of racism. And then the epitome of what you have experienced. Thank you. And the epitome of what you have experienced is when you met Lima and you got involved in her movement. Now, I don't know if you got involved in any movements here in the United States before you met Lima, and if you have, you need to talk about that too. And then also, as you pointed out, this is very important when you talk about the Jewish experiences too. There are various problems that, there's generation divide where some Jews do not know anything about the Holocaust, just like some blacks don't know anything about the civil rights movement, even today. They were protected and shielded from that. So you might want to talk about, as you compare the two, how this evolved and how it got bigger and bigger and bigger, how it affected you personally first, as being the privileged person, and how your vernacular got larger and larger. I think it's a very important story because I had heard many, many stories about Walt Disney, which disappointed me because he's so talented, had such beautiful family, entertainment things, and so I was just taken aback, but that happens. So therefore, I think you're on to something really great.
Can I jump back?
Yeah.
It's going to be a difficult book to write, and it's going to be a difficult journey. As your partner in crime, I'm already worried about the backlash, because it's going to be a lot, and it's going to be something that will not just end with you. It will continue to generations, to your children and your children's children. And I have been encouraging you to write, but some days you just blow me off my feet with some of your ideas.
So if you were me, would you not write this book?
I will surely write it,
Yeah, exactly.
but I will also have a deep conversation with everyone that I love and tell them that there will be repercussions that will follow them for years. You don't know how they will handle it, but you just want to prepare them for it. As someone who calls herself your African sister, I'm already looking ahead of it. It will be a great book, a brave book to write, but it will be a tough book to live after you've written. That's the point that, and I could have told you that in private, but.
There are 3 questions here. Why don't I start back here and then come back.
So as one black sheep to another, obviously the people in your cohort know all of your accomplishments and they know the full spectrum. But what have you found to be the most effective way to dismantle that inevitable disbelief that happens when people only know you in one context? I.e., if they know you in that context, how do you convince them that you are not on your high moral horse?
That's a really good question. Well, there's bunches of things that interrupt I don't ever get to make a first impression because somebody's generally formed an opinion of me before I get to, unless they don't know my name, in which case I get to be regular. But when people know my name before they meet me, there's this barrier, and I almost always try to make a joke first, just because it really does tend to just disarm people. But that thing about being on your moral high horse, I worry about that. I mean, because it's important to call things as you see them, but, you know, there's sort of a hypocrisy hardwired into the project. And I worry about it a lot. It's impossible for me to hold myself to the kind of standards I'm talking about here. But I really believe, okay, so here's my philosophy about failure. So when you learn to ride a bike, one of the first things you learn is that you have to be going forward. Otherwise, you can't function, right? You can't balance. And when you're on the bike, you're never actually exactly in the middle where it's perfectly balanced. You're moving back and forth across the middle. So in fact, it's like a million small failures. But if you don't tense up, do you know what I mean? And if you don't overreact to those little failures, it all amounts ultimately to success. And that's kind of how I think of, I try not to get too wrapped up in the ways in which I'm failing, and I just try to make the next morning better. So I just try to talk my talk the best I can, and I let people make their decisions about me, and many of them are not going to like me. And there's nothing I can do about that.
So maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll open the doors.
You are a very powerful writer, and that was really wonderful. And my question is, you talked about the discomfort of bringing up, how privilege makes us see things differently, and I think that you've touched upon something, that is, you've touched upon something that sort of strikes at the core. And what I would wonder, in the next chapter is, how do you deal with some of those discomforts? I don't know if you can force, that. I don't think you can force any kind of realization or epiphany on people if you're not ready. Like that audience in Jerusalem, I don't know that they were ready to see their privilege. So that's something that I wrestle with as well, and I wonder, where that could go. We know that racism, is a real thing, and we know, but then you can sort of smooth it over by saying, well, we're multicultural. So how do we bring race back into multiculturalism and say, how do we talk about race now in a post-racial society, supposedly? Right, yeah. But that's what I wonder. That's my burning question. Yeah. You've named it, but now what?
Yeah. Well, obviously, I didn't write the whole book today. But I feel like I have a lot to say about privilege because I've watched, I think of privilege as morally neutral. Look, I didn't ask to be born where I was born, and while there's nothing I did to deserve it, it also doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Entitlement is not morally neutral, because entitlement is an absorption of the idea, unquestioned, that this is a natural thing, that this privilege fell on you because you've somehow earned it or deserved it, or just, you're just that great because you were born. And that, so I draw a distinction between those two things, and I feel I've watched entitlement work like a Japanese beetle on so many people I've known over the years, most especially my father. It hollows you out from the inside. It really is devastating. Unchecked, it's a devastating moral condition. And it's one of the reasons I really, really want to talk head on about privilege itself, because I think our country is suffering from the ravages of unquestioned entitlement in many, many ways we don't even begin to understand. And it is as a result of that unquestioned entitlement that it doesn't bother us enough, that we kill whole families in Pakistan on a rather routine basis, with our drones and strikes. It should bother us.
I mean, you know, you can argue all you like about just wars and whether or not they're reasonable and whether Putin should be challenged in Crimea and all the rest of it. We can argue about that till the end of time. If you're gonna have a war and argue that it's just, you had better be pretty upset every time someone dies. That's the cost of it. And I'd like to restore some consciousness to my country because I find it deeply saddening, and I think it starts with questioning entitlement. So it's really hard to talk about privilege without people getting their back up. It's really hard, but I feel like I have to do it anyway.
So I think we should open the doors.
Sorry.
I think we'll open the doors, have wine and cheese, and then Abby will be around to take the questions. So a couple things. So we asked you here to give you an award, and you really gave us a gift. You gave us an extraordinary gift, a personal, poignant, powerful gift that was not nice. So thank you. And so here is your.
Do I need a fork?
You do. But you brought the muscle with you. So this is your award, and you can take it out if you wish, or you can just show it in the box. You want to take it out? It's sort of like a bocce ball.
Can I try and win another one and then we
Yeah, sure. So congratulations.